I'm approaching the witness with the same.
Thanks.
And the courtesy copy for Your Honor. Ms. Dews, what have I handed you?
This is a map of Calkins Campground, exactly like the one I took.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yep,
Has it been changed or altered in any way since you last saw it?
not a bit.
Your Honor, I move to enter Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Entered.
Ms. Dews, can you point out the Leckrone Loop on this map?
Okay, so the Leckrone Loop is the one in the middle of the campgrounds, in between the upper lake and the musky pond, right here.
When did you go on the Leckrone Loop?
So I headed over about 3 o'clock, maybe a little bit later, and when I started going on the trail around 3:20, 3:30, I ran into some people on the trail.
Do you know who these people were?
Yeah, they were a mother and daughter, and when I went up to introduce myself, they said their names were Jordan Ryder and Parker Page.
Ms. Dews, is Jordan Ryder in the courtroom today?
She is. She's the one sitting at the end of the table with the floral skirt.
May the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified the defendant?
The record will so reflect.
Ms. Dews, did you notice anything about the defendant and her daughter while on the trail?
Yeah, I remember that Parker was limping pretty bad and complaining. She was also smacking tree branches with her hiking staff. Jordan kept yelling at her to quit it and was shooting her these menacing glances.
How did Parker react to the defendant?
Parker started jabbing at Jordan's calf with her hiking staff.
Ms. Dews, would you recognize this hiking staff if I showed it to you today?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm showing opposing counsel what has been marked as Exhibit 17. I'm showing the witness the same.
Thank you.
Ms. Dews, what have I handed you?
A Cascade Mountain Tech hiking staff, exactly like the one Parker had.
Has it been changed or altered in any way since you last saw it?
Nope, not a bit.
Your Honor, I move to enter Exhibit 17 into evidence.
Any objection?
Without objection, Your Honor.
Entered.
Ms. Dews, what did Parker do after she was jabbing with the hiking staff?
So Parker was jabbing at Jordan's calf with the hiking staff, and that's when Jordan yanked the hiking staff out of Parker's hands and jabbed at her with it.
Ms. Dews, would you be able to demonstrate what you saw?
Yes, absolutely.
Your Honor, may the witness step off the witness stand to demonstrate with Exhibit 17 what she has seen.
Witness may.
Okay, say I'm Parker.
Okay.
How was she holding the staff?
Well, first she was holding it in her left hand, and underhand, kind of like a sword, exactly like that. And she was jabbing at Jordan's calf.
What did the defendant do?
So Jordan snatched the hiking staff near the top of the handle and yanked it back. Now the force of this alone almost dragged Parker to the ground.
Where was Parker when this happened?
She was standing near the edge of the overlook.
What did the defendant do?
So Jordan held the hiking staff so that its capped end was pointed towards Parker's left hip. And then she jabbed quickly in the air towards Parker's left shoulder.
What happened to Parker?
And Parker jumped back towards the edge of the cliff.
Thank you, Ms. Dews. You may retake the witness stand. Ms. Dews, what happened after you saw Parker jump back?
Well, I just wanted to get out of there. Didn't want to be part of whatever sort of family drama was going on, so I started walking off trail. I did that for about an hour and eventually circled back to where I was before, which, by the way, was this little star on the map, the overlook.
Did you notice anything when you circled back?
Yeah, see, that was the weird thing. Like I said, I'd been gone for nearly an hour, and in that time, Jordan and Parker hadn't moved an inch, and they were still arguing.
Could you hear anything they were saying?
Yes, I clearly remember Parker saying, I should have just stayed home with Corbin.
Did she say anything else?
Not at that time. Like I said, wanted to get out of there again. I could tell it was time to pull the parachute on this one. So I kept walking, this time on the trail.
What happened next?
That's when Jordan lunged at Parker. It looked like she was making the same sort of jabbing motion towards her left side.
Ms. Dews, did the defendant hit Parker?
I mean, Not that I saw, but a couple minutes after I started walking away, I heard screaming coming from where I left them.
Do you know what time this was?
It was about 5 o'clock.
Do you know who was screaming?
Yes, it was Parker. I'd heard her yelling at Jordan before, but this time it was so loud and blood-curdling. I heard her scream, "I wish you'd never gotten out of prison. You love our stories more than the real me."
Did she say anything else?
Yes. Finally, and loudest of all, I heard her scream, "I hate you!"
Miss Dews, did you ever see Parker again?
Not alive. The next day, the whole campground was swarming with police. That's when I found out that Parker was missing. I helped out with the search as much as I could. I took them to where I'd seen Jordan and Parker fighting and where I heard a scream coming from. And after an hour, they found her body.
Where was her body found?
They found her at the bottom of a ravine, in the exact same place I'd seen Jordan and Parker fighting the day before.
Thank you, Miss Dews. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Good morning, Ms. Dews.
Good morning.
Now, you're a bit of a MeTube star, is that right?
I don't know if I'd call myself a star. I only have like 3.8K subscribers, but we're working on it. I like having like a little community of fellow nature lovers.
Well, you only have 3.8 thousand subscribers, but you like to tell people you have 4,000, is that right?
Sometimes when I'm working with advertisers, they prefer to put on their banners like nice round numbers, so sometimes I round up, yeah.
So sometimes you tend to exaggerate these numbers for the sake of money,
Objection,
correct?
Your Honor. Relevance?
Response?
Yes, Your Honor, this line of questioning goes towards the credibility and bias of this witness in that they have a tendency to exaggerate things.
Response?
Your Honor, the number of subscribers that Miss Dews has does not make any fact of this case any more or less likely, and therefore this is irrelevant.
Your Honor, may be heard on those grounds.
Sure.
It does make a fact more or less likely in this case, as if a witness is willing to exaggerate the number of subscribers they have, they may be just as likely to exaggerate in a trial.
Yeah, I mean, so anything remotely related to bias, I think, is explorable. However, I don't think we need to spend too much more time on this. So overruled, but get to
Yes.
get to the crux of it.
So you have exaggerated for the sake of publicity, correct?
I don't think I have to exaggerate. I mean, the adventures that I go on are thrilling enough in themselves. Like the time I jumped from the CN Tower, or the Willis Tower, or, well, you get the point.
Now, I'd like to talk about the jabbing you saw in the trail from Jordan to Parker.
Yeah, okay.
This only happened, as you said, after Parker was jabbing at Jordan, right?
Yeah, she was poking at her calf.
And when Jordan swung back at Parker, Parker didn't actually get hurt, is that right?
I mean, not that I saw, but I did hear screaming after I left them, so I don't know.
Let's talk about that screaming. You didn't actually see anybody scream, is that right?
Nope, I was a little bit farther on the trail, so the trees obviously obstructed my view. I couldn't see them, but I knew it was Parker. I recognized her voice.
But you did, like you said, you didn't go back to check on them, is that right?
I actually did. I tried to stay back for a little while. My first reaction was to call out, and I did. And when there's no answer, I did go back. But by the time I got there, there was just a bunch of broken twigs. No one was there.
So you didn't see Jordan or Parker on this cliff, is that right?
No. No one was there at that point.
Now, you also, after this, you went back to your cabin, is that right?
I did.
Where you spoke with the police, is that right?
That was the next day, but yeah.
The next day, yes.
Yeah.
And you spoke with the lead investigator, in fact, Detective Chesney, correct?
Yeah, I did.
And Detective Chesney did not ask you any questions about a Mr. Sam Fisher, is that right?
No.
Even though you'd been at the campground all day, is that right?
Yeah, but I think I met everyone there and there wasn't any Sam.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Ms. Dews be allowed to step from the witness stand.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Hughes.
Thank you.
Anything else from the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Dr. Quincy to the stand. You proceed.
You may.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ruth Quincy.
Dr. Quincy, what do you do for a living?
I'm the Chief Medical Examiner of Breckenridge County, right here in Midlands.
Dr. Quincy, for those of us who might not understand what that means, what does it mean to be a chief medical examiner?
Well, I'm responsible for determining the time, cause, and manner of death for all of the victims that come through our office. I analyze the bodies through an autopsy process to determine these factors.
What were you asked to do in preparation for today's trial?
Well, for today's trial, I was responsible for determining the cause of death for Parker Page.
Doctor, I'd like to back up a little bit before we get into that. What's your educational background?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biomedical Sciences from Ohio State University, as well as a medical degree from the University of Virginia.
Have you ever been published in your field?
Yes, numerous times. My most recent was actually in 2016.
Dr. Quincy, have you ever testified as an expert in court before?
Yes, as Chief Medical Examiner, court testimony is a significant part of my job.
Dr. Quincy, apart from examining Parker's body, what materials did you review in preparation for today's trial?
Besides the autopsy process itself, I also looked at Parker's full medical history as provided by her previous doctors.
Dr. Quincy, after reviewing Parker's medical history, what's the next step in performing your autopsy?
Well, I then begin the autopsy process itself, and this has two parts: the external examination and then the internal examination.
Dr. Quincy, I'd like to break those down with you. What is the external examination?
The external examination is when we analyze the exterior of the body to look for bruises, cuts, abrasions, and the like that could help determine the time, cause, or manner of death.
What were your initial findings in Parker Page's external examination?
Well, for Parker Page specifically, I saw a series of bruises all along the right side of her body, as well as severe trauma to the right side of the head. I also found one bruise on her left collarbone. The head trauma on the right side is what I was able to determine as the official cause of death.
Dr. Quincy, what's the next step in performing your autopsy?
I then began the internal examination, starting with a time of death calculation.
Could you elaborate a little bit on what that time of death calculation is?
Absolutely. We look at three factors for this: livor mortis, rigor mortis, and then we use a standard equation in the field to come to a body loss number. After incorporating all three of these factors, I found that the time of death was between 4 and 6 p.m. the previous day.
Dr. Quincy, what do you do next after calculating a time of death when coming to your conclusions?
I continue with the internal examination process. For Parker Page, I found that she had fractures all along the right side of her body, consistent with the bruising that I had found. I also saw that there was a collarbone fracture under that left collarbone bruise. This was actually one of the more significant portions of my findings.
Doctor, why was this so significant in coming to your conclusion?
Well, first of all, the bruise on the left collarbone was the only injury Parker had on the entire left side of her body. This means it's extremely unlikely that she got that bruise during the fall off the Lecron Loop cliff, which is where she received all of her right side injuries, including the brain injury that killed her. In addition to this, the bruise was a perfect half circle in shape, and that's not a size or shape that we really see occurring in nature. All of this led me to determine that it was a bruise given to her before death from a man-made object, so it could not have come from the fall.
Dr. Quincy, if this bruise couldn't have come from the fall and it had to be a man-made object, were you able to determine what in fact did cause Parker's bruise on her collarbone?
I was, yes. The bruise on her collarbone was an exact match to the hiking staff that was found in Miss Ryder's tent.
Would you recognize that hiking staff if I showed it to you today?
Absolutely.
I'm approaching the witness with what has previously been entered as Exhibit 17. Dr. Quincy, looking at this hiking staff, how were you able to match this staff to the bruise on Parker's left collarbone?
Well, as you can see, the butt end of this staff is an exact circle. Now, the bruise on Parker's collarbone was a half circle in shape that exactly matched the size of the circle. And the reason it was a half circle and not a full circle is because any object pressed against the collarbone would be naturally impeded by the bone itself. So if Parker was struck with a circular object such as this one, it would leave a perfect half circle imprint on her collarbone, which is exactly what I saw on Parker Page.
So, Dr. Quincy, were you ultimately able to come to a conclusion about Parker Page's manner of death?
Yes, I was. I was able to determine that Parker was pushed over the edge of the Lacron cliff with this hiking staff. I was able to determine that this was in fact a homicide.
No further questions, John. Approaching the treating exhibit.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Quincy, just to be clear, you're the chief medical examiner of Breckenridge County, correct?
Yes, I am.
Meaning that you performed the autopsy on Parker Page, correct?
I did, yes.
Also, before that, you were a medical doctor, correct?
Yes, I was.
Meaning that you have lots of experience with different types of diseases, correct?
Absolutely.
And one of these diseases is osteogenesis imperfecta, correct?
Yes, that's true.
And you're aware that Parker Page, she was diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta, correct?
I was.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. It's been established that Parker Page's cause of death was falling off a 40-foot cliff and hitting her head on a rock as she landed. Whether or not she suffered from a disease does not change her ultimate cause of death, and therefore is irrelevant in coming to Dr. Quincy's conclusions.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. The cause of Parker Page's death is what is in contest in today's case. We're contesting that Parker was not pushed off the cliff, and rather that something else entirely different happened, and that is our position today. Their position has no bearing on our side of the case as a defense.
No, but why do we care about osteogenesis imperfecta? What aspect of, their case or one of your defenses does that go to?
Our defense is that Parker Page suffered from severe respiratory issues on the day of July 14th. These severe respiratory issues stemmed from her severe osteogenesis imperfecta and her not taking the medication that she was prescribed for that disease.
Your Honor, may I respond on this grounds?
Yes.
Actually, Your Honor, cause of death is not at issue today. No one's disputing whether or not the cause of death was Parker Page falling and landing on her head after a 40-foot cliff. If opposing counsel is trying to use the OI to explain how she died rather than that 40-foot fall, then it is irrelevant under Rule 402.
Response.
We're not contesting that Parker Page did not fall off the cliff, rather that the reason that she fell off the cliff is different than what the state is arguing today. We believe that Parker Page fell off the cliff as a result of her respiratory issues, stumbling, and falling off that cliff rather than being pushed.
Okay, so now I understand. I'm gonna, at this time, overrule the objection. However, I would suggest connecting the osteogenesis imperfecta to your theory of respiratory issues in the fall sooner rather than later.
Yes, Your Honor.
And if she fails to, feel free to re-raise.
Dr. Quincy, just to be clear, Parker Page was diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta, correct?
Yes, Parker had type 1 OI, which is the most mild form of the disease.
And some symptoms of osteogenesis imperfecta that Parker could have exhibited were severe respiratory issues,
Yes, that's true.
stunted growth,
Yes, though she didn't really exhibit that symptom. That's more a symptom of the more advanced types of OI. She was a little short and a little underweight for her age, but nothing out of the normal, which is, again, why it's so clear that this was a very mild form of the disease.
As well as abnormal pulmonary collagen in her lungs, which you saw, correct?
Well, OI is by definition a disease of the collagen, so yes, she had abnormal collagen.
Now for this disease, Parker was prescribed multiple medications, correct?
Yes, that's true.
She also had a rescue inhaler, right?
Yes, she had also been diagnosed with asthma previous in her life.
And it's true that you also had a toxicology report on Parker Page, correct?
I did, yes, that's very standard for an autopsy process.
But in that toxicology report, you found nothing, correct?
No, I didn't find any history of medication, but I did see that she did have her inhaler, so I suppose she just didn't feel she needed it at that time.
Or you didn't find any indication that Parker had been taking her medication, correct?
No, I didn't, but again, as this was the most mild form of OI, I didn't find this really that troubling.
But it's true that she was taking this medication for her respiratory issues, correct?
That's what the medication had been diagnosed for, yes.
If she wasn't taking her medication, she could have been experiencing severe respiratory issues on that day, correct?
Actually, given how mild her form of the illness is, I'd say it's far more likely she wasn't taking the medication because she was not experiencing those respiratory issues. While OI can make you more prone to them, it doesn't mean you always have them, especially in the case of somebody with type 1 OI.
If you're prone to these types of respiratory issues, severe, or rather extensive running or other activity could cause these issues, correct?
It's possible, but actually for type 1 OI, we usually suggest light exercise, such as camping or hiking, as a possible form of treatment because of how mild that version of the disease is. So if she was not taking her respiratory medication, it led me to believe that she simply was not experiencing those respiratory issues, which is why it did not influence my cause of death analysis.
But just to be clear, Dr. Quincy, these medications themselves weren't found on Parker Page, correct?
No, because again, she appeared to not have been taking them at the time of her death.
Meaning that if she had been experiencing respiratory issues at some point on July 14th, she wouldn't have had that medication to take, correct?
I wouldn't know whether they were anywhere within the belongings. I only analyzed Parker's body and looked at the materials given to me, so I have no idea if she could have had them anywhere else on her that day.
I want to move on and talk a little bit about that clavicle injury you talked about on Parker Page.
The left side collarbone bruise, absolutely.
Yes, that's right. There was a fracture under that bruise as well, correct?
Yes, there was.
Now, Parker sustained several injuries on her right side on that day, correct?
As I mentioned, yes.
But there was just the one injury on her left side, correct?
Yes, that's why it was so significant to me.
That's right. It was different than all of the other ones.
Yes.
It's possible that if it's so different from all the other ones, it could have been from a completely different incident entirely.
No, because of the color and size of the bruise, it was clear to me that it was given relatively close to her time of death. And again, it was an exact match to the hiking stuff found in Miss Ryder's tent. It was very clear to me that this is the object that it came from.
I want to talk a little bit about how you came to that conclusion, that that object was what caused that injury.
Sure.
You were originally unable to conclude on the cause of Parker's death, correct?
Well, at the time of when I concluded my original analysis, the police had not finished their investigation yet. So I noted that it could have been either homicide or accidental. Once I received the complete information from the police, I had a fuller picture and was able to determine that this was in fact a homicide.
That's right. It wasn't until you were given those items by the police that you came to the conclusion that it was homicide, correct?
Yes, I never would have come to that conclusion without having all of the information necessary. Once the police provided me with the materials found in Miss Ryder's tent, it was very clear to me what the real situation was.
But Dr. Quincy, the police only gave you 3 items, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's my understanding that that's what they found in the tent. I did also have my assistant search the campgrounds to see if there was anything where Parker's body was that could have been significant.
You limited your search to just these 3 items, right?
Well, those are the items that I was provided with, but again, I also sent my assistant to the campgrounds to do further investigation.
They didn't bring you any sticks or rocks from the campground?
No, again, I had my assistant look over the grounds, but a perfect half circle shape is not something that we see occurring in nature. A perfect half circle is almost always a man-made object. There are no perfect half circle sticks or pebbles that Parker could have fallen on to give her this bruise.
Even though you were investigating a possible homicide, you limited your investigation to just 3 items on the entire campground, correct?
No, I also had my assistant look over the campgrounds to see if there were any other necessary objects for us to analyze, and there weren't because, again, a perfect half circle bruise is a clear indicator of a man-made object, and it was an exact match to the hiking staff we found.
At this time, I have no further questions.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor.
You're excused.
Thank you.
The state rests, Your Honor.
Okay.
At this time, we ask for a brief 5 to 10 minute recess.
Fine.